The wind cut through the alley, sharp as glass, and there she was, a little girl barefoot facing the wall as if it had scolded her. Her small shoulders trembled, her fingers raw against the bricks. Richard froze. This wasn't just a child, it was a question life had thrown at him. "Sweetheart," he whispered, "where are your shoes?" She didn't move, didn't turn, only murmured, "I can't go inside. Not until I bring dinner." Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Richard didn't know why his chest tightened. Maybe it was the way her voice broke on the word dinner. It wasn't just the sound of hunger. It was the sound of someone who had learned silence too well. The street was quiet except for the faint hum of a streetlight and the whisper of snow under his boots. A girl alone, in the cold, in one of the richest neighborhoods in Atlanta. How long had she been standing there? Who was she waiting for? And what kind of world lets a child learn her lessons from a wall? Richard looked around. Rows of elegant houses stood behind black gates, their windows glowing with warmth. Somewhere inside, families were eating, laughing, living. Yet here, just a few steps away, a little girl was learning how to endure pain in silence. He took a careful step closer. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked softly, afraid to scare her away. Her lips trembled before she spoke. "Anna." The name came out fragile, almost weightless, as if she was afraid it might be taken from her. Richard repeated it quietly. "Anna." It felt sacred on his tongue. Something about her voice echoed inside him, pulling at memories he thought he'd buried. His own daughter's laughter before the accident, her small hands clutching his coat on snowy mornings. He swallowed hard, shaking the thought away, but the ache stayed. That night, Richard would uncover a truth that no amount of money could prepare him for. And as he stood there, staring at the small figure before him, he realized this wasn't just an encounter with a lost child. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Richard Kade was not a cruel man, a billionaire by name but lonely by heart. He had built companies that stretched across cities, industries that shaped skylines, yet none of it could fill the silence of his home. The money came easily, peace never did. His wife had passed 5 years ago, and his daughter, his only child, was taken too soon in a car accident on a night much like this one, cold and unforgiving. Since then, he had learned to exist behind glass walls and glowing screens, making deals that earned him everything except sleep. Some nights he would sit by the window, staring at the city below, wondering how a world so full of lights could feel so empty. He wasn't looking for redemption that night. He didn't believe he deserved it anymore. But life has a way of presenting second chances in unexpected forms. And now, here he was, in a quiet street blanketed in snow, face to face with a small girl who didn't ask for help but needed it more than anyone he'd ever met. Her thin dress clung to her body, her knees trembling from the cold, and her breath came out in small, shaky clouds. The dim light from the street lamp revealed cracked lips, flushed cheeks, and eyes that seemed older than her years. Richard crouched beside her, lowering his voice to a gentle calm. "Who told you to stand here, sweetheart?" he asked. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the handle of an old lunchbox. "My aunt," she whispered. "She says the wall teaches me. I can't come home empty." Her words hit him like a weight. "The wall teaches me." He repeated it in his mind, trying to make sense of it. The idea that someone could make a child stand in the freezing night to learn something was almost unbearable. "Empty?" he asked carefully. "What does she mean by empty?" Anna shook her head, eyes fixed on the wall as if it held answers she wasn't allowed to say out loud. "She says if I don't bring food home, I stand here till I remember how hard life can be." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Richard felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't discipline. It was cruelty wrapped in the language of lesson. He wanted to say something, to promise her safety, but the words refused to come. He just watched her, realizing from the marks on her wrists and the frost on her bare feet that this was not the first night she had faced that wall. It had been many nights, perhaps too many to count. And for the first time in years, Richard felt something break open inside him, a kind of sorrow he had long forgotten how to feel. He wrapped his coat around her. She flinched, her shoulders tightening as if she expected a blow instead of warmth. That single movement froze him in place. No child should react that way to kindness. Her eyes darted up to his, wide and frightened, like a bird that had learned every hand meant harm. The weight of that moment hit him harder than any winter wind ever could. Richard felt a pang in his chest, not pity but guilt. Guilt that he and people like him could walk through life insulated by privilege, while children like Anna fought the night with empty stomachs and fading hope. When he brushed the hair from her face, he noticed the bruises, faint yellow ones around her neck, newer ones shadowing her wrists. They weren't from falling. They were from lessons no child should ever have to learn. "Come with me, Anna," Richard said softly. "Just for a meal. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe." She looked down at the snow beneath her bare feet. "She'll be angry," she murmured. "She says the dark helps me remember." The words lingered in the air, twisting through his thoughts like smoke. "The dark helps me remember." Remember what? Pain? Hunger? Obedience? It wasn't a lesson. It was punishment, disguised as teaching. Richard swallowed hard. "You don't deserve to remember pain," he said quietly. "You deserve to be a child." But Anna didn't answer. She just stared ahead at the brick wall as if invisible chains held her there, and that was when Richard decided he wouldn't let the night end like this. Not again. Not another life lost while he looked away. He reached out his hand, firm but gentle. "Anna, you're coming with me. Just tonight. I promise." For a moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she placed her tiny hand in his. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling in his grip. He wrapped his coat tighter around her and guided her toward his car. The snow crunched beneath their feet, and for the first time that night she didn't look back at the wall. But just as they approached the car, a voice echoed from the far end of the street, harsh, sharp, unmistakably female. "Anna!" The sound sliced through the night. Anna froze, her hand slipping from his grasp. A tall woman stood beneath a flickering streetlight, her figure rigid, her expression unreadable from the distance. Richard's pulse quickened. "That's her," Anna whispered, her voice trembling. "My aunt." He turned to face the woman, but she didn't move closer. She just watched. Then, with a slow smile that didn't reach her eyes, she turned and disappeared into the shadows. Anna began to cry quietly, the kind of cry that carried years of fear. Richard held her close. He didn't know what kind of woman made a child stand in the cold to remember the dark, but he knew one thing for certain. He was going to find out. But what he found when he followed her home was worse than he could have imagined. If this story has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's truly following till the end. The old apartment building smelled of damp carpet and cigarette smoke, a place forgotten by time and mercy. The wallpaper peeled like tired skin, and the air carried the chill of things left unsaid. Richard's shoes echoed against the cracked tiles as he followed Anna down the narrow hallway. Each flickering bulb hummed above them, threatening to go out completely. Anna stopped at a door that looked ready to collapse. The wood splintered, the paint clawed off by age or anger. She stared at it for a long time, clutching her empty lunchbox to her chest. "She's inside," she whispered, her voice trembling like the light overhead. Richard knelt slightly beside her. "You don't have to be afraid," he said gently. Anna didn't answer. She just reached out and knocked. Soft, hesitant, like someone who had learned that noise brought pain. The door creaked open, and standing there was a woman whose presence filled the hallway with unease. Her eyes were sharp, her mouth tight, her skin pale under the dim bulb's glow. She looked Richard up and down before fixing her glare on Anna. "You again," she hissed, her tone slicing through the air. "Didn't I tell you the wall doesn't move till you learn?" Anna flinched and lowered her gaze. Richard felt his blood stir, anger mixing with disbelief. "She's freezing," he said, his voice low but firm. And starving. You call that teaching? The woman's lips curled into something close to a smirk. She disobeys. She steals. The wall listens better than she does. Richard took a step forward, his shadow stretching into the doorway. She's coming with me, he said. The woman's laugh came sharp and bitter. And who are you, savior? She sneered. You rich people think you can buy everything, even other people's sins. Her words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. For a brief moment, Richard faltered. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't his battle to fight. Maybe walking away was the easier path, like he'd done too many times before. But then he felt it, a small, trembling hand slipping into his. Anna's, her fingers cold but clutching his tightly, as if that one grip was the only thing tethering her to hope. In that instant, he saw his daughter again, the same fragile trust in her eyes, the same silent plea for someone to stay. His heart clenched. No, Richard said quietly, his resolve hardening. Not this time. He turned toward the woman, his voice steady. You've hurt her enough. It ends tonight. The woman's expression shifted, surprise, then anger, then something darker. You don't know what you're doing, she muttered. That girl. She's not what you think. Richard ignored her and guided Anna out into the hall. But as they stepped away, he felt her eyes on them, burning, hateful, promising that this wasn't over. The hallway lights flickered once more, then went out completely, leaving only the sound of Anna's quiet breaths and Richard's pounding heart. When they reached the car, Richard opened the door for her and wrapped the coat tighter around her shoulders. You're safe now, he said softly, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. As they drove away, Anna looked back one last time at the shadowed building, her face unreadable. Richard glanced at her through the mirror. Anna, what did she mean when she said you're not what I think? He asked quietly. But she didn't answer. She just stared out the window, her reflection pale against the glass, and whispered, You'll see. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, unease creeping into his gut. He had wanted to save her, but what if saving her meant uncovering something far darker than he was ready to face? Days blurred into one another. The nights in Richard's mansion felt heavier now, filled with the echo of a little girl's voice and the memory of her small hand clutching his. He had tried to visit the old apartment building again, but the door was sealed, the lights off, and the neighbors said no one had lived there for weeks. Anna was gone. He called hospitals, shelters, even the police, but no one knew her name or her face. Each unanswered call left him more haunted. He would sit by the fireplace late into the night, replaying that moment in the cold alley, her voice trembling as she said, I can't go inside, not until I bring dinner. Those words gnawed at him, not just as guilt, but as something unfinished, something that demanded redemption. Then, one quiet afternoon, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Kade, a soft voice asked. This is Helen from Oakwood Children's Shelter. We have a little girl here who keeps drawing your face on the wall. She says you saved her. For a moment Richard couldn't speak. His throat tightened. Did you say, Anna? He managed to whisper. The woman paused, then replied, Yes, sir. She calls you the man with the warm coat. He was already in his car before she finished speaking, his heart pounding faster than the engine. The drive was long, winding roads, endless fields, time stretching between memory and hope. When he finally arrived, the shelter was small, quiet, with children's laughter echoing faintly from somewhere inside. A staff member led him down a bright hallway lined with crayon drawings. Then he saw it. One stood out among the rest, a picture of a man and a little girl holding hands beside a wall, a golden sun above them. When she saw him, she froze, then smiled shyly at first, then brighter, as if sunlight had found her again. Mr. Richard, she whispered, running toward him. He knelt, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. The social worker waited before speaking. There's something you should know, she said gently. That woman who claimed to be her aunt. She wasn't. She was just a neighbor. After Anna's parents died in a car accident 2 years ago, she took her in. But instead of caring for her, she treated her like a servant, punished her for things no child could control. Richard listened, silent, his hand resting on Anna's back as she leaned against him. Every word hit like a blow. The idea that the world could fail a child so completely filled him with both rage and resolve. He looked down at her, clean clothes now, a hint of color in her cheeks, her eyes still carrying the faint weight of too many yesterdays. And in that moment, Richard made a promise to himself and to her. "You're not going back there," he said softly. "You have a home now." The paperwork was done within weeks. Richard didn't adopt her out of guilt or pity, but because for the first time in years, he understood what purpose truly meant. He hadn't just found a little girl on a cold street. He'd found the chance to feel again. The mansion that once echoed with silence now carried the sound of laughter, small footsteps, and hope. And every evening as they sat by the fire, Anna would draw pictures of the sky, of birds, of walls that no longer trapped her. Sometimes she'd look up at him and say, "You found me." And Richard would smile and whisper back, "No, Anna, you found me." Years drifted by like pages turning in a book neither of them wanted to close. Anna was no longer the trembling child who once faced the cold brick wall. She had grown into a young woman full of grace and light, her laughter echoing through the same halls that once held silence. Richard often stood by the window, watching her paint in the garden, her brush moving with confidence, her eyes filled with the kind of peace he once thought he'd never see again. Every year, on the anniversary of the night they met, they returned to that old alley. The wall was still there, but it no longer held the same weight. Instead of tears and bruises, it now carried color, bright blues, yellows, and pinks, the strokes of a girl who had turned her pain into purpose. Together they painted flowers, dreams, and words of hope for other children who might pass that way. "So no one ever feels alone here again," Anna once said, dipping her brush into gold paint. Richard had changed too. The billionaire who once measured success by numbers now measured it by smiles. The mansion no longer stood as a monument to loneliness. It became the headquarters of the Kade Foundation for Children, dedicated to helping those who had fallen through the cracks of life. He poured his wealth into building shelters, schools, and homes, places where children could feel seen, heard, and loved. Journalists often asked him what inspired such generosity. He would always smile and say, "A little girl taught me what true wealth is." And he meant it. Because for Richard, every time he looked at Anna, laughing, painting, or speaking to children who reminded her of who she once was, he saw not just a miracle, but a message. Life had taken everything from him once, his wife, his daughter, his peace. But in return, it had given him a reason to live again. Sometimes the walls built to break us become the very foundations that define who we are. For Richard and Anna, that wall wasn't just a memory. It was proof that healing can bloom even in the coldest places. And as the years rolled on, he often repeated one quiet truth to anyone who would listen. True wealth isn't found in what you build, but in who you lift. Hate, what would you have done if you saw Anna that night, standing barefoot in the cold, her face pressed against the wall, waiting for permission to exist? Would you have stopped, or walked away like so many others do? Richard didn't plan to be a hero. He was just a man who chose to listen when the world stayed silent, but that one moment, that single act of compassion, changed both their lives forever. Do you believe it was fate that brought them together, or something more divine? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know what part of Anna's story touched you the most. And if you think this story was powerful, wait until you hear what happened in our next folktale, the story of a man who followed the sound of a child's cry beneath an abandoned bridge and uncovered a truth that would shake an entire town. Until next time, remember, sometimes the smallest kindness can rewrite an entire story.